In this lesson of drawing a residential building permit set, we're tackling detailed opening schedules, the windows and doors that can make or break your approval. I'll show you how to use Rayon's block library, draw custom blocks, and format schedules like a pro. And by the end of it, you'll have a polished door and window schedule ready for submission. Let's dive in. Welcome back to drawing a residential building permit set. I'm Chris, an architect based in the UK, and in this lesson we'll be focusing on detailed opening schedules, a crucial component of any permit set. These schedules clearly document which windows and doors are being added or replaced, ensuring that your design complies with municipal requirements. Because exterior modifications often fall under strict regulations, opening schedules are not only best practice, they're also frequently mandatory for approval. In this session, we'll expand the detail and rigour of our permit set, building toward a complete and approvable package. Together, we'll be covering leveraging Rayon's extensive block library, over 10,000 blocks with front, top and side views to create professional schedules, drawing custom opening blocks to match project-specific needs, best practices for organising and formatting schedules, and enriching blocks with metadata to generate accurate and automatic tables. By the end of this lesson, you'll have a polished door and window schedule with the level of precision and documentation that municipalities expect. Everything will be demonstrated in Rayon Design, a browser-based design platform that I've used to create this entire course. Rayon takes you seamlessly from initial sketches through to professional permit sets. It's free to use, so if you haven't already, set up your account at rayon.design. Download the free permit set template linked below. Follow along by customizing the free template below to your own project. If you'd like more personalized guidance, you can also book a one-to-one demo through the link in the description. And finally, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more lessons in this series, as well as future tutorials. Let's dive in. Okay, so here's where we left off last time. So we have all our sheets, we have our front cover, our legend, our site plan, then we've got our proposed and our existing floor plans. And then if you remember in the last lesson, we looked at the elevations and sections. So this is all within the paper canvas, and I'm going to create a new model canvas for our windows and doors. So we'll go up to the left here, go to canvases, create a new model canvas, we'll call it windows and doors. Okay, and I want to bring in a view of the floor plans to start with. So we'll go to layers, we'll go to view, we'll go to existing and proposed plans, and you can see here that creates my window. And if I double click in there, I have my proposed ground floor and my proposed first floor. So we'll make sure they are 1 to 1, and then I will command and drag. So that's our ground floor. I'll just copy across for our first floor. We then want to start tagging our windows and doors. So that's basically giving them an ID number, so a reference number, so we understand which door we're talking about, rather than saying, oh, you know, the door that's next to this thing or that thing. They just have an ID number, which is the way we do things in terms of best practice. So we can go to blocks, we can go to libraries. Again, we'll go down to title blocks and annotations. We'll find a tag and we can drag that in, just scale it up. I'll just change the color of this so I can go into the block. I can click the lines and I can change the style. So maybe I'll make these kind of a bright blue color. With the color set, I'll just create a new layer called tags. I will place that on the tag layer, and then we'll just populate these next to each and every door and window. Okay, and then you'll notice if you click on the block itself, it has an instance property already within it. So you have a tag name and a tag number. So I can change the tag name to D for door or W for window, and then I can change the number depending on which instance of the door it is. So we could start with D1 over here. We could then say maybe the front door is D2, that door is D3, D4, D5 and so on. And I can do exactly the same thing with the windows. So we can change the D to a W, and then W1, W2, W3, W4, and so on. So now you've tagged all of your windows and doors. Each is identified by a separate name and number. So with all those windows and doors tagged, we're now going to decide which are being replaced and which are being retained, because they will have a different reference point. So for the project, we are proposing to change all external windows and doors, and that's to increase their U value. So at the moment, they're just old single glazed timber frame windows, and we're looking to increase the thermal properties and introduce double glazing to those. So we know all the external windows and doors are going to be replaced. And then internally, we've decided that the ground floor internal doors are staying as is. And the upstairs, that's where we're introducing new windows and doors. So in terms of what we're trying to communicate, we don't need to reference out those ground floor doors because they're just staying as is, so a note will do. In creating our plans, we've used the Rayon block library. So those are windows and doors that have been set up with not only a plan view, but a section and elevation view already set up. So I'm just going to show you how they work. So if we look back into my blocks, so these are the blocks that are populated within the model, we can see a number of the windows and doors that have been used, and any of the elements, any of the blocks that have that little purple symbol next to them, they have a front and side view. So take this one, for example, the site single casement. I can just drag and drop this here to show you what I mean. So I've got the plan view there, but I also have an elevation view as well and a section view. So that's the intent behind the window. We can see that plan, section, elevation without having to draw anything. That's just drag and drop into our drawing sheet. Exactly the same thing with the door. We can just drag that door in, and you can see there the purple icon. I also have an elevation and a section view of that door already set up. So again, as standard, everything is drawn for you. You just then need to communicate dimensions or the design intent. Okay, now that we've explored the Rayon block library, let's take a look at how we can create a custom opening block to match our project specific needs. So in this project, for example, we have a curved bay window at the front. I'll just jump back and show you. We have this curved bay window, which obviously in plan has that curve to it, and in elevation has a series of faceted panels. Now, obviously in plan, we can create our own block for that purpose, and I want to show you how we do that. So a block, for all intents and purposes, is just a collection of information. So we can draw a couple of curves, for example. So let's just trace our current window outline. We can offset, create the thickness of the window, let's say 50 mil the other way. So in plan, that's our very basic window form. If I highlight that and then right click, I can turn that into a block, and that means I can use it across the model. Then with that block created, I want to right click and go to edit. Now you can see that little circle, that little white one in the center, that's my insertion point. So at the moment that's a spot insertion point. That means it comes in, the insertion point is central to that block. To make it cut through a wall, which is obviously what a window and door does, they're hosted in the walls, we can change it to a segment. So I can then set my segment on my center line like that, and then I will show you if I draw a wall and then I even just drag this into that position, align it centrally, that's now cutting through my wall. So that obviously now is acting as a window, just like any of the standard windows within the block library, and that's cutting through our wall. So, and exactly the same with the elevation. So I've just brought the line work in for that bay window. I can highlight that line work, I can select block, and then you'll see it appear in my block library on the left hand side. I can even rename that and call that, bay window. And then that could be used on another project, say. And even with this, I can say what type of view it is, so top, front, or side. And similarly with the plan, I can go to the block there. I can rename that bay plan, and then select that as the top view. And then exactly the same thing with the section, say. So, just like we drew a section with our guidelines, so we can draw a very basic section and again turn that into a block. So you can see that there. I can rename as bay window section and then set that as a side view. So in essence, I'm basically creating a set of information that sits parallel to my standard window blocks or door blocks. And with those drawn, I can then share them amongst the rest of my team for different projects, for example. So say you were working on a proposed building and you designed a certain window, you knew all the sort of manufacturer's information, that all worked really well for you. That could then be set within a block, and then you could implement that across multiple projects. So that's the base information created. Now let's look at creating a schedule to clearly convey our windows and doors. We'll be following the best practice for organising and formatting these schedules, so let's get started. Okay, with those drawn, we now want to create a schedule. So it's going to be a visual schedule, one that shows illustratively the design intent behind the window, so like we've got the plan, section and elevation, but we also want to be able to show the tag, the title, which distinguish it as a separate element, and also the specification, so things like the opening, the material and the finish. So I want to start out by drawing a frame around my element, and we'll create a series of frames in essence. We'll create a title, and then we'll create a series of subheadings. In terms of our tag, that will be the same as we've got the window and door tags. So we'll create just a piece of text. We'll call that W1 as an example. I'll make that slightly larger. I'll set a style, so call that heading, for example. And again, we'll have a title, so we'll call that bay window. So that's really just a description about what it is. And then we'll have some subheadings. So again, I'll change the style, maybe make that smaller again, create a subheading style, copy those down, and we'll have something like opening. So that describes, how the thing opens, frame, glass. So if there isn't glass, finish. And then we'll have hardware. So hardware is the hinges or the handles. So those are our subheadings, and then whatever that is will appear in those next columns. So this is where it gets interesting. So we want to have metadata, and that allows that block to be able to be edited. So you can change it for that change specification. So we can, if we make this whole thing a block, including the frame, create a block, and then that allows us to have instance properties. So we're going to add a property. So I can add tag, for example, and that will be a text type. We'll save that. Then I can go into my block and I can click on my tag. I'll double click on that text. And instead of it just being a dumb piece of text, just a written out element, I can add a variable. So then go to instance, and then I can find my tag. So that then will replace it with this little instance element. So we'll create done again. And then you'll see there on the right hand side, that tag, I can now fill it in from there. And that means that, say I duplicate this framework, so for my next window or door, instead of it adjusting my original block and changing that, it can then change to D1, for example. So you're making the framework smart. And I can do exactly the same thing with all of the rest of my parameters. So I can click on my block, I can add name, for example, and then I can add all of these open things. So opening, frame, glass, finish, and hardware, and then go back and plug that into those text elements. So again, go back in here, find my instance, find the title or name, and then the same with the openings. So again, just change that text to the tag, and then you'll see it disappear, and I'll show you where it goes in a second. Okay, so that's been completed, and now I can then fill in the information on the instance properties rather than directly into the block. So the frame, we could say, is a softwood timber. The finish is something like semi-gloss RAL 9004. Hardware, stainless steel hinges and handles. Glass, double glazed units. I could tell a U value, for example. Opening, top hung opening. And then we've got the title, which is bay window. And you can see there that some of those text elements are overhanging the area. So we can just go back in here, select that, and then we can drag over that zone. But the great thing is that I can adjust that as I see fit. So if I wanted to add something to that, so double glazed units with ceramic frit, for example, I just adjust that there and then. So that sits as a block. I can see it in my block library down here, and then I can use that as a framework moving forward. So again, I can move it over here. I'll just move my example door, and then I can change those elements and say, okay, the frame now is a hardwood frame, for example, and the finish is stained timber veneer. The tag is now D1. The hardware are concealed hinges. Glass, it's not applicable because it's a solid timber door. Opening, side hung, and we'll call that internal door. So it basically gives us a framework to be able to fill out that's standardized across the project. And again, you can use this, you can set it up in your office, set it as a standard block, and then it can be just implemented throughout multiple projects. Okay, so I've just spent time finalizing my schedule. So you can see here that we've got all that information. We've got the plan, the section, the elevations, those dimensions, and then we have all our information. So our openings, our glass, our frame, finish, and hardware. And basically I've identified each of the different windows across the project. And depending how many repeats you have, you can decide on whether you have a type. So say this window, for example, appeared multiple times, I would only draw it once and I would name it as a type with multiple instances. But on this project, we have quite a lot of variety. So you can see all those here, and exactly the same thing with the doors. So we've got the elevations and the plans, all the dimensions, and then all of that specification information as well. And because we've set all of those elements up as blocks, they've been incredibly easy and consistent to implement across the project. And that's what you want. You want clear formatting. You want that information clearly communicated, easily visually shown, so there's no ambiguity. Rayon also has smart properties that can be added onto blocks in order to avoid manual counting, summing, and listing of objects or square meters. For the next part, I will demonstrate how to add properties to a few of our opening blocks for those of you that want to streamline this process. This is particularly recommended for large projects where procurement and takeoff reports can become very complex and manual mistakes can occur. When using properties in Rayon directly on blocks, it streamlines your schedule creation process. So I've shown you metadata in terms of the blocks that we're using for the window and door schedule, but I want to show you that you can implement metadata to the actual blocks of the windows and doors themselves. And this is really, really important if you're working on a large project, for example. You want to count loads of things, you want to avoid mistakes, people doing it manually. This is a really great thing to do. So I can jump back into my existing and proposed plans. And I'll show you these ones as an example. So the doors here, as an example, the block that's been submitted is a door EU70. So that's a standard Rayon door. So we can look at that. We have that front view, we have that side view. And you can see here, if I double click on the block, you can see those custom properties on the right hand side. So at the moment, there's view, standards, whether it's an EU or a US door, whether it appears on a model canvas or a paper canvas, but you also have things like brand. So I could say what the manufacturer of that door was, for example. Maybe we've got beautiful Italian doors from Lualdi, and maybe we want to put the price in, for example, so we could put price. And then we go to properties, select price, and we say £5,000 as an example. So that information will be present in any of those blocks where it's used multiple times, and exactly the same thing for the window. So we can select the window here. Again, this is a standard window that's been used within Rayon. I can go into that block family and I can add those elements into there. So a window manufacturer, ideal combi, for example. I can add a property, again, price, 1,000. And you can see there, anytime that instance is created, you have that metadata as well. But what use is that metadata? So we can go over here, and where we have all our different elements, so layers and blocks, we also have tables, and I can create a new table. So I'm going to call that windows and doors. And you can see here in our categories, it's basically looking at the model canvas, all of the stuff that's there, and giving us a list of it. So currently it's listing out all the walls, all the zones, and all the block instances. So all the block instances are the windows, the furniture, anytime we've dragged a block onto that space. So let's get rid of the walls and the zones and only show the block instances. So now it's currently showing that we've got 479 different types of elements, different blocks within the canvases. This is obviously including furniture, trees, and doors and windows. Now, a couple of things we can do. We can filter, so we can add a filter. So we can say it includes, for example, window. So now it's only looking at windows, for example. But we can also add new columns to that. So we can add different elements from this metadata that we've shown previously. So we can add price and we can add brand. So now you can see here that we have 6 instances of that same window that we've used across the project. This is how much they are, this is how many of them are, and these are the brands. So we could even group by the brand if we wanted to. So say we had different brands across the project, we could group all those together. And exactly the same thing with the doors, for example. So we could clear the filter and then add a filter in, which includes door, for example, and then you can see the number of doors that it's reading throughout the project. And this obviously all depends on how you set your model up, how consistent you are in terms of your naming, but it can be a really, really powerful tool. And it's not just for windows and door schedules. Let me show you something else. So I can also create an area schedule, for example, or it will communicate the areas which are being listed throughout the building. Instead of looking at the categories for the walls or the block instances, I can do it by zone. So there it lists out all of the zones which are appearing in the project. And I can go there and add the area as a column. So the guest bedroom, the master bedroom, the kitchen, dining. So that's reading those zones which are within the project. It's giving me the area schedule. And if I went back in, for example, so we've got our master bedroom here, I could add a custom property, which was, say, finish, for example, and we'll say timber planks. I can add a column to there for finish, and you can see there it then tells me what the material is, and this could be used for things like material takeoffs, which is obviously really helpful. Now I know now that there's exactly 14 square meters of timber planks which are being used for the master bedroom, and exactly the same for the guest bedroom. I could add that zone property again. I could say it was timber planks, and then I could even group by the material, and now it's given me a sum of that total timber planks because it's being seen in both the guest bedroom and the master bedroom. So just to give an example, it has a whole raft of really powerful things which can really streamline your process, and it's applicable for windows and doors. You can use it for furniture, so for things around procurement, for example, you could add metadata around the cost of elements, so the bed, the windows, the dressing table, whatever you want, you can add data, can then be read by those tables. The other great thing about the tables is that you can export them. So you can export as a CSV or an Excel SX file, and they can go to things like Excel. So you can use that data moving forward throughout the project. With the schedules formatted and completed, let's get these onto our drawing sheets to finalize the submission. Okay, lastly, let's set the sheets up. So we'll jump back to our paper canvas. We've got all our drawings that were created last time, and I'll very quickly add a new page, set that as an A3. Again, we can copy our title sheet across. I'm just going to set up a grid line to separate the page in half so I know everything is nicely aligned. So first of all, we'll add in our 2 reference plans, so from the existing and the proposed. So I want to be able to see those in context with the schedule, and then I can add in my existing my window and door view. And again, I just want to crop this boundary, double click into there, and find a decent size to view these at. So I think maybe 4 on a page probably looks good. Now I'm less interested in the scale because this is really just about communicating the visual aspect, and we have the dimensions on there. But in essence, I can then copy this across and take a view of those next pages. And obviously we can make sure everything's nicely aligned and set out. But that means that if I go back into the drawings, make any changes to those schedules, make any changes to the elevation, those things will be updated on the sheets because I'm always looking back at those original views. Okay, and there you have it. We have all of our sheets neatly set out. We have our window and door tags. We have all that information that we were referencing. So the opening, the glass, the frame, the finish, everything is dimensioned and neatly set out with our windows and doors, which clearly communicates the design intent and the specification for everything we're proposing to do. That brings us to the end of this lesson on creating detailed opening schedules for your residential building permit set. At this stage, your drawing should include clear and accurate door and window schedules, organised, formatted, and ready to meet municipal requirements. The next lesson is the last one for this course, where we'll continue strengthening the permit package by adding final documentation and design details, and finalise our documents so we have a complete set ready for approval. If you'd like to explore Rayon more deeply, don't forget you can access the free permit set template linked below, or book a one-to-one demo for tailored guidance. And of course, if you found this helpful, please like, comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the upcoming lessons in this course. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next and last session for this course.